Hi, I'm Dr. Avanti Singh. In over 20 years of practicing both Western medicine and Eastern healing traditions, the most important thing that I've learned is that healing is a journey we take together. So on this podcast, I'll be demystifying Ayurveda and other integrated medicine, showing how these simple, ancient practices are the keys to unlocking a healthy modern life. We are all healing catalysts because healing starts within. It starts with you, and it starts right now. This is a Soulfire production. Episode number 115. Hello, my beautiful friends. And if you're new here, welcome. I'm Avanti, and this is the Healing Catalyst podcast. I'm so happy that you're here with me. So today is part 2 of a 2-part episode about the key wellness trends for 2024. If you haven't already heard part 1, make sure that you go back and listen. That episode is linked for you in the show notes. This week, I'm joined once again by Faye McCray, Vice President and Head of Content at Well and Good, to discuss 4 of the 8 wellness trends for the upcoming year. In our conversation, we explore the new technology that will help you optimize your sauna sweat sessions and why strength training your skin barrier is the key to skin health. We also talk about postpartum care and why supporting mothers in the 4th trimester is crucial for the health of not just the newborn, but also for the health of the mother. And make sure you listen until the end of the episode when Faye and I get into a lively discussion about the last trend of smart home products that can monitor everything from anxiety and stress to menstrual flow. Yep, you heard me right. Smart tampons are being tested and are set to hit the market soon. This one honestly had me asking a lot of ethical and privacy questions. As I mentioned last week in part 1 of this 2-part episode, this is the 3rd year that I've been contacted by Well and Good to discuss their annual wellness trends report. And I absolutely love diving into what their team is reporting and tracking and then sharing it with all of you. I'm so excited to share part 2 of my conversation with Faye McCray about the key wellness trends for 2024. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Healing Catalyst podcast. I'm so excited to be back with you again with my guest, Faye McCray from Well and Good. And we are doing part 2 of a 2-part series talking about the Well and Good 2024 trends in health and wellness. And if you haven't already listened, make sure you listen to part 1, which was released last week. But we are going to keep going through some more of the trends. These are super interesting. Faye, thanks so much for joining me again. I appreciate your time in this busy time of the year.
Oh, absolutely.
Wonderful. So let's jump right in. So the next trend that we're going to talk about, the headline is the red hot sauna industry is boiling over with new ways to optimize your sweat session. So tell me about this trend.
Yeah. So as we know, saunas aren't new, right? But in 2024, what we'll see is a lot of tech innovations that increase the potential of the benefits that we can reap from these sweat sessions, right? So thermotherapy is getting smarter. There's whole new ways to maximize our sweat, better and faster results. We know a lot of this is rooted in a lot of ancient modalities, like, not just what saunas as we know them in gyms or, in spas, but saunas have existed. Things rooted in Turkish history, Russian history, Native American sweat lodges. I mean, it's pretty amazing how far back the use of this sort of mode of wellness goes. But the next wave of saunas is going to see a layer of additional features. So some of them are red light therapy, which uses a shorter wavelength than infrared, and it reduces inflammation, which is helpful in skin treatments. We also see electromagnetic field therapy. So a lot of really fantastic innovations in this space that are increasing the benefits, but through new modalities.
Yeah. And so much there to talk about. So Ayurveda has been doing sweating, Svedana is what it's called in Sanskrit, as a treatment for all kinds of imbalances in the body, as we talk about with doshas, with vata and kapha specifically, are usually the ones that we treat with Svedana, because with pitta, with fire, it just increases the fire. But it's used very commonly. as part of panchakarma, which is a very involved treatment for detoxification, but it's also used as something that people could do, once a week to help to keep them in balance, to remove toxins. And the idea here is very similar to what you're talking about, is the idea of removing toxins from the body, right? That is one of the main reasons that we do it in Ayurveda. There's lots of data, as you were saying, there's tons of studies that have been done, that really, 4 times a week, if you did a sauna for 20 minutes, it will significantly improve your mortality. I mean, there's studies that have been done, since, the 2000s on this, and that where, people who use saunas 7 times a week were 63% less likely to experience sudden cardiac death and 50% less likely to die from cardiovascular disease than those who only used a sauna once a week. I'm reading some stats and some data that I pulled up from some of the studies. So, I mean, and there's many more studies than that. So the data is really clear that sauna is a really, really good treatment, a really good practice for us just in general for our health and longevity, in addition to treating all of these different issues that you might be having with your skin, et cetera. But one thing I wanted to ask you about is, this new technology. I think one of the things that people are always hesitant about when I ask them about sauna, have they been doing it, is access, right? How do you get access to this versus, sometimes it's in a gym, sometimes it's not. But I know that there's a lot of home setups also. Is that something that you guys were seeing as part of this trend and, especially with this newer technology?
Yeah, what's interesting, a lot of times with these trends, the first place that you see them is businesses popping up and offering to their clients. So there are these Perspire sauna studios with locations that are opening up sort of worldwide, offering halotherapy and salt therapy. To your point, really honing in on those benefits, particularly decreasing inflammation and boosting immunity. So we see them popping up in these environments first. And usually what we see with these trends is they then become adaptable at lower price points and in places where we can incorporate them into our living.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
you didn't really see this technology going into the home, because I know there's all those sauna, those systems. I don't even know what exact names. I've never gotten one myself, but I know there's like those little beds are almost like little sleeping bags that you can get and have in your home and, do these therapies. But you didn't really see that yet, not the first iteration yet.
Yeah, I mean, there are some new like infrared saunas that we're seeing in people's homes that are accommodating to different budgets. So, you know, sometimes those are more cost prohibitive than going, to your local spa or wellness studio. But we see them at price points varying between $200 and like $3,000. So, there's portable ones. Heat Wave has a portable sauna. There's one that's a low, and I think that's a lower price point. And then you see like Sunlight and, has one that's upwards of $3,000. So there are ways to incorporate these into the home as well.
Yeah. And some of those you're talking about are like a full sauna, like, a booth that you'd put in versus the sleeping bag option. So there are a lot of different options, is what you're saying.
And you see those sauna blankets as well,
Yes.
popping up. I'm always a little wary of, but I know some people enjoy those, using those.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. The sauna blankets. I'm calling them
Yeah.
sleeping bags. They're not sleeping bags. They're sauna blankets because you go right into it. It's almost like you're cocooned in a sleeping bag. Yeah, I've heard good things. I mean, I've had quite a few people ask me about those, and I unfortunately don't have any personal experience. It's probably something I need to look at because I get asked the question so much about getting these home setups, not the full booth that you're like installing in a room in your house,
Yeah.
which is quite expensive and you have to have the space and all that kind of stuff. But the sauna blanket could be an option for some people, especially if you have a lot of chronic inflammation types of issues. It might be something worth looking at. The other question I have is that, there's a difference between sort of this idea of wet and dry sauna. Did you guys see any trends going in, either direction, or the technology, or using both or one or anything like that?
Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah, I mean, we've seen a lot of dry technology in this space. So, like cold therapy, as I mentioned, salt therapy, pulsed electromagnetic field therapy. So, typically dry in this area. That's why we saw it more akin to kind of a traditional sauna. But yeah, that's interesting though to dig into to see if we're seeing it on the other side.
Yeah, because wet and dry have been used in Ayurveda for centuries, right? So we have both techniques that we do. And, again, there are benefits to both. It's also your tolerance level and what you're trying to treat. But there are both types of, you know, setups that you can try. It's either a wet or a dry. So that's really interesting. Have you tried any of these new therapies like the red light or any of those newer?
Salt therapy.
You have? What did you think?
I mean, I definitely saw the benefits of it for sure. Like, I don't know if it's, kind of maybe not as consistently as to see sort of if I notice any long term health benefits, but I definitely felt better. I remember sleeping really well that night.
Yeah. And so when you did salt therapy, can you explain like what was that experience for people who may not know what that means exactly?
Yeah, so I did it we have a local spa in our area that offers it as a part of what they call like this healing water suite. If you're in, I'll give them a plug. They're called the Pearl Spa if you're in Maryland, but they have a whole salt room. So you go in, it's kind of like dimly lit. It's a shared space. They kind of try to keep it small, but there's salt lamps and you just kind of relax. I think there is a time limit on it. I don't want to get that wrong on how long you should stay in there for health reasons. Very relaxing, very zen, definitely not, it wasn't like a pouring sweat that I got from it, but more sort of like a mist, like a moistness, but it was relaxing, it was really, really nice.
Yeah. And is that different than the salt caves or is that the same thing? Maybe it's a little different.
I think it's pretty similar, but
Okay.
it was warmer. So
Yeah.
I think it did incorporate a bit of that dry heat.
Okay, got it. Yeah, so that is a little different than the salt because I've been to a salt cave before, but I know that we would just go in our regular clothes and you kind of just chill out. It's very zen, and you do feel really well after that. But I don't know that it was a sauna concept, so it's really interesting. They're taking that to the next level now, is incorporating the sauna
Yeah,
piece.
a nice combination of yeah,
Yeah, that's cool. And then red light therapy. Have you tried any red light therapy sauna?
it's on my list.
Yeah, I actually have tried one and I found it to be really interesting. I found it to be really relaxing. It's a dry heat type of thing and you're sitting there and you've got this red light. I don't know that I, have done it enough to really understand sort of the difference between that and how I felt versus what I would feel from a regular dry sauna. But again, the red light therapy, as you said, is very, very good for inflammation. And we know that, the data is there that it helps with that. So, it's sort of that 2-for-1 sort of thing. You to go into a sauna, you get the benefits of the dry sauna plus the red light therapy, it increases the benefits even further. So it's kind of like, why not do that? Right. So,
Right. Yeah,
yeah.
for sure.
So I think that these are good things to think about, as far as, for a lot of the listeners, if it feels like it's cost prohibitive or, kind of difficult to get somewhere, you can do some of these things in a similar way at home. You can take a nice hot shower. You can, make it steamy in your bathroom, try and work up a sweat. I know when I was growing up, my mom would always have us do facials over the sink. We would boil water and then turn it off, put it on another
Yes.
another place like the old fashioned and then, open up the lid, have a towel over our heads and like bring in the steam. And that really helped with like any upper respiratory stuff. But it, was a way to sweat. Again, there are some innovative ways you can do this, creative ways you can do it at home too to get some of the benefits. But I think if you're dealing with like some skin issues or inflammation of your joints, you probably need to go into an actual sauna to get that. It's harder to do it for full body at home. So, but
Yeah, for sure.
that's
Sure.
interesting. So it's the next thing. So you think this is going to become these sort of chains, sort of the way massage, kind of became, these different massage chains that are out there. There's many of them where it's almost made massage more accessible because it's at a lower price point. You can go once a month. That's kind of what I'm hearing is that it's sort of the similar concept that's coming.
Yeah, yeah, we're seeing these pop ups. Stretch too, I feel like, is another one like massage. You're seeing more and more places pop up, for folks to go for a good stretch. So, yeah, I think we'll see more of these. And, hopefully, too, to your point, cost prohibitive is so relative, right? We could say $200 is a good price point for some people. For some people, that's just still not a good price point, disposable. So yeah, hopefully as we see more of these popping up, they'll become more accessible as well. But I love the hacks. I did the same thing with my mom.
Yeah, I know, right? Those were great ones. It's really good for your skin, for your facial skin. So, and actually like leads right into the next one. Look at that, which is the next trend that we were going to talk about is strength training your skin will become the single most important part of your beauty routine in 2024. So tell me about this one.
Yeah, I love this one because, like many of the trends, I learned so much from this one because I had no idea. And then once I learned it, I was like, oh, we should all be thinking about this. So this is all about strengthening your skin barrier. So your skin barrier is really that first line of defense against elements like pollution and bacteria, which I think, becomes even more important when we're, those of us on the East Coast had to deal with the Canadian wildfires this summer. And we saw that haze settle on the East Coast, and you think a lot about your breathing, but you also need to be thinking about your skin and that protective layer. So, when it's functioning properly, your skin barrier will be hydrated, it'll be healthy. But when it's compromised, you're vulnerable to things like dryness and irritation and inflammation, acne, eczema, psoriasis. So, this trend is really about products that are popping up geared towards that barrier to get that skin barrier healthy. They're lighter weight products, they're suitable for sensitive and acne prone skin, but we're seeing a lot of companies now prioritizing what it means to protect your skin barrier.
So, I'm going to push back a little bit because, skin barrier versus skin health. Is this just like a marketing gimmick? How do you feel about that? Because when I first read this, I was like, yeah, isn't that what we're doing with, any kind of skincare products? Like, how does this make it different? What would you say?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, it's a good pushback. I think a lot of times things include ingredients, that, don't strip the skin, and that are really about kind of catering to that first layer. I think a lot of times when we think of skincare products, we think of acne, we think of kind of blemishes, hyperpigmentation, as opposed to what are we doing about the overall health and longevity? How are we protecting our skin when we go out beyond SPF? So, for me, this one is a lot about protection and strengthening that barrier. So you will see improvement, in your skin when you're taking care of your barrier health. But it's not like a retinol, where you're going to get rid of the blemish right away. This is more of a long-term investment in your skin.
Okay. And so, like, what kind of products then would differentiate it as being for skin barrier versus skin health? Like, how do you distinguish, like, what's the difference if you're going and looking for these products?
Yeah, well, transparently, a lot of these products are just using barrier in their marketing. So Paula's Choice launched a barrier repair, which is like an advanced moisturizer, which produces the skin's natural production of ceramides to strengthen that barrier and allow for better moisture retention. So these are products you'd likely be using in addition to the products that you use already, but geared towards that barrier. We've seen Rock has a line called Barrier Renew. It's an essentials collection. So a lot of these products will say right on it that that's what it's for. Sometimes you'll see things like cellular hydration, like that's kind of a similar language for barrier repair. But that's how you distinguish it. You want to look for things that are speaking directly towards that barrier.
Right. Okay. Got it. Yeah. It's a little bit of a pushback on it because I'm like, oh, I'm not sure that I would really necessarily see those differently. But, what they're trying to get at. Again, this is something that we've done in Ayurveda for years. Like, skin is one of the first things we talk about. It's the largest organ of the body. It's your first barrier, as you said, to the outside world. And it's also where we release toxins. And so, in Ayurveda, we, traditionally will oil the skin with self oil massage or abhyanga, right? Or dry brushing, or garshana with gloves, with silk gloves, right? So we're trying to really sort of protect and sort of stimulate that skin barrier to keep at its highest function, right? Through the exfoliation, through the oiling to help remove toxins. So it's a similar idea. Again, from centuries ago versus sort of the newer technology. And I think that's kind of the point. And we've talked about this in the first part too, is that so many of these trends, and now I've done this for the third year with you guys, it's so interesting to me because it's like taking the technology and combining it with these ancient practices that we've done for centuries in so many different healing traditions, not just Ayurveda. And it's sort of like going back to basics, but sort of in a new, improved way with the new technology, which I think is really, really cool. It's really, really interesting.
Yeah, Agreed completely. I think a lot of it is back to basics and also like just increased literacy. For me, a big part of my attraction to this trend was like I had no idea about my skin barrier and that I should be thinking about it, but it makes complete sense, right? When you think about the things that are in the environment, so even if it's not, one of these more higher end products, kind of giving care to staying hydrated, all of those things factoring in to that skin barrier as another layer of things that you should think about. Also, when you look at things like retinol or exfoliating acids, they strip the skin, right? So you want to be thinking if you're using these things, I also need to be paying attention to how am I investing in the repair as
Yeah.
well.
Right. And so it's that the whole idea of like if you're exfoliating, even if you're doing it, sort of as like a home remedy, right? With Gare Chanel, with the silk gloves or a dry brush, you're exfoliating, but then how are you going to replenish that? And in Ayurveda, we would say you're going to oil, you're going to help so that your body can remove the toxins, so that you're nourishing the skin. That would be sort of the two pieces that go together. And so I think that's, what you're saying is really is clear is, that a lot of the skin treatments that we've seen before are very targeted towards a specific skin issue, which do strip the skin. And so this is about adding things back to the skin.
Yeah, it's about the health, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I love this one. Love this one. Okay, so let's move on to the next one, which is this is a really interesting one about the fourth trimester. Birth isn't just about the baby. Next generation postpartum care is born. So let's talk about, and I know this was one of the trends that we talked about last year too. Similar. It was something about doulas. But so tell me about this one for this year.
Yeah. I mean, what I love about this trend is that this has just been a pervasive need for so long. I think anyone that's a mama or has had babies knows that that fourth trimester can be really lonely. It's the baby's here, right? So everybody's thinking about the baby. You're thinking about the baby, and often you're deprioritizing yourself and not just your emotional needs, but your physical needs. And what we also know from a medical standpoint is that maternal mortality increases in your fourth trimester. So it's the time where there should be a lot of attention on or our birthing person. So with this trend, what we're seeing is a lot of places popping up, and addressing these needs. So it's deviating from that idea of, when the doctor lets you go, they say, if you need us, call us. Now it's like, we know that you need someone, we know that you need support, and here's where you can come to find that support. So we're seeing virtual support, popping up, and we're seeing wellness spaces popping up for mom and baby, to go for that extra care for a couple of weeks. But just a lot of these services coming in and saying, we know that you have needs beyond pregnancy, and we want to be there for you to help address those needs.
hmm So give me some examples of this. Cause I mean, yeah, you're right. In being a physician, I have the perspective of, you have your follow-up visits after you have the baby with your pediatrician for the baby. You have it with your, OB-GYN for you. But again, it falls off a little bit. So how is this different then?
Yeah, yeah. So there's virtual support now. So we're seeing places like Forum Anywhere. They have a retreat space in New York for those that are New York based. It's like a village for postnatal treatment. So you go and stay a couple of days, but then they also have virtual support with access to text messaging and lactation consultants and perinatal mental health specialists. There's lots of that kind of popping up, individual and group therapy, medication management, lactation support, as I mentioned, physical therapy, acupuncture, but just these places that are popping up in support of you during that period. This was like a personal one for me too, because when I had my last son, I suffered from postpartum preeclampsia. And I remember being at home with a severe headache, having blurred vision, but also kind of telling myself, you're probably just tired. You're probably sleeping. And fortunately, I had a partner. My husband had taken like a longer period of parental leave. This was our last. So he's like, I want to soak it all up and stay home as long as possible. But he insisted, he was like, we have to go to the doctor. We have to find out what's going on. This doesn't feel okay. And of course, we found out my blood pressure was through the roof, and I had to be urgently, and I feel fortunate and privileged that I had someone home with me that can say, I'm going to take you and let's get in the car with baby, go. I could call my sister to pick up my other children from school. But there are, situations where folks don't have that kind of support, right? They're home alone with baby, or they're forced to go back to work really soon after they have baby. So these places are things that you can access on your smartphone. Is this normal? am I supposed to feel this way? To be able to get that support. So that's like an extreme example. But then, of course, we all know, if you're trying to nurse, you suffer from, some stumbling blocks there sometimes. So being able to have access, that you don't have to, go through loops maybe with insurance. You can just call it up on your app and, have that support. So it's a great trend popping up in a space that sorely needed it.
Yeah, I know that's really interesting. I like the idea of the apps. Are there some specific ones that you guys sort of saw that you guys are really impressed by? Because I know that's the next question. People are like, "Oh, which apps are there?" So,
Yeah. Yeah. Born Anywhere, they have that virtual support app. Motherocracy or Motherosity, I think is what it's called. It's a postpartum tracking app. It uses daily check-ins to monitor and forecast your physical and mental health, which is fantastic in a case maybe like the one that I had. If I was sort of taking my blood pressure at home or something and tracking, I'd be able to kind of maybe get an alert. ULA, which offers also virtual drop-in postpartum office hours. But we have a whole litany of them listed within the article too, if you want to check out the trends on Well and Good.
yeah, yeah, and those will be linked in the show notes for all of you, for the listeners, so that you can check those out and look directly. Yeah, again, and this is really interesting because I do think that that quote fourth trimester is such an important time. And I know in many of our cultures, this is something that was supported by other women in your family, other family members, elders, right? Being around, sort of coming and sort of surrounding you with that care of, whether it was making food for you or staying with you to help you with the baby. I know that I experienced that. I mean, it's been 25 years since I had, my first kid and 22 since my last one. But both times, my mother and my sister, they came and they helped me, stayed with me. My mom would make me all kinds of food and, it was all the support that you need when you have no clue what you're doing, taking care of a baby for the first time or even the second time, and you have no idea what you're doing. But I think, yeah, I know. I think that it's really, really important, like you said, and not everybody has that support at home. It's like one of those things about the culture that we live in. We are living separately from families now, living far away from them many times. And so it's not easy to get that support that we had sort of built in, long, longer times ago when we lived more in community or lived closer to our families. We had that ability to drop in on somebody who just had a baby and stay with them. It's not as easy anymore. And so I think that this is a really interesting solution in a way to that problem.
Yeah, more of that back to basics, right? Like,
Yeah.
and this is the way that we're going to provide it in the age that we live in. We're, to your point, we're also spread out, that we often don't have the support that maybe our parents did.
Yeah. And so did you see that some of these different services are also specifically medical services? Are they more, the support around sort of the medical issues and then saying you should go, to a medical center? Were they specific with, physician groups, or what were you kind of seeing there?
Yeah, definitely wellness geared. Things like I mentioned, acupuncturists, doulas, physical therapists. So not as many medical doctors. I've seen mental health specialists, at these places, but I think it's having that kind of first line expert to even just say, hey, this may be something that you need to go back to your doctor about or go to a medical professional rather than sort of guessing and diagnosing on your own is a step in the right direction. This is one of those trends that you get excited about, but then there's another part of you that's like the health industry also has to catch up here. They have some onus here, to be able to address some of these issues. But I love that it's, a step in the right direction and also a way that, the private industry is stepping in and saying we can provide support.
Yeah, yeah. So it's almost like continuing that doula care, midwifery care into the fourth trimester, right? Because
Yeah.
I mean, that's how I look at the doula midwifery, during pregnancy is this additional level of care that you may not be able to get from a physician because they're, busy taking care of hundreds of patients and doing surgeries and deliveries and all that kind of stuff, and doing a lot of complicated, more emergent types of procedures. That this is like the bridge that you have with midwives and doulas during pregnancy. And then I don't know what we'll call these, but for the fourth trimester, having that sort of step in between, right? is I think what I'm hearing from you.
Yeah, yeah, 1,000%, 1,000%. It's again that back to basics. Let's figure out how we can support you in a way that it would if you had someone in your house with you right now that was looking out for you.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, that's great. I mean, I will be very interested to see how this progresses because I think it's very needed. And I'm hopeful that it'll help a lot of people who are really struggling in this time period, especially with they have a child for the first time, and are really struggling. So, okay, so let's move on to the last trend that we're going to talk about, which is our everyday gear can now perform medical tests from home. So this, I got to tell you, I saved this one for last because this is one that I'm having a lot of issues with from a privacy and just a lot of different issues here. So I want to hear what you think about this because I read the article and I was like, tampons? Wait, what are we talking about? So let's go into this one.
Yeah, I mean, technology is just getting smarter and smarter. I mean, we knew, our smartwatches were tracking our fitness, our smart rings, sleep stats. We've seen that for a long time, but now we're seeing a lot of just everyday gear also have this dual purpose of being able to track things. So you mentioned the tampons and menstrual cups. They can now be connected to an app to tell you about your flow level, your pH, early signs of diabetes, cholesterol, gynecological diseases, even check your vaginal microbiome, for bacterial infections or fertility issues. We've also seen cool things like smart contacts and glasses, smart night guards, but things that kind of work in a way of diagnostically kind of testing to see, if in screening to see if there is anything that you should be concerned about or you should be seeing the doctor about. So, in addition to seeing this kind of explosion of increased information, we're also seeing that these digital health devices are transforming the medical field in a number of ways. I mean, as we know, the medical field is currently saturated, right? There's, folks are waiting longer to have appointments. So we're seeing also health insurance companies investing in some of these devices and tools as ways to, pre-screen folks out in their own homes and mailing them to them. So we're just seeing a lot of innovation in this space, a lot of uses, but I am ready for the privacy conversation because definitely got my wheels turning when I saw that this was increasing in popularity as well.
Yeah, so I mean, there's so many issues. I totally respect that. This is a way to try to address some of the needs in medical care because we have such a crisis right now with the number of healthcare workers and the number of people who need to get in. I mean, it's crazy, right? But this idea of, first of all, of inserting something into your body, either in your mouth or into your vagina, that has smart technology in it. There are so many problems with that, first of all. Just trying to understand that. That's the first issue. But let's talk about that point first, because that must have come up in your discussions. Like, how is that healthy, right? So again, this is a case where you're trying to do something to help narrow the gap between, access and availability of care, right? And I get that. Then you're putting people at risk by putting these devices into their body. It's so strange to me. Like, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think with anything, as you explore anything, whether you're going to put a watch on your wrist all day, you want to ask questions, like you want to know, all the data. And I think what we see with a lot of these industries, especially when they pop up, is it's unregulated currently, right? So sort of you're at your own kind of discretion and risk. Some people value the benefits of this technology, over kind of the cost. And cost could be how is this impacting, if at all, your health? But also what is happening to this data, that's collected? Who owns it? Where is it going? How secure is it? And because it's not regulated, there's really no uniform answers around it yet. But I would say it's upon any patient. And I don't know if I've shared this with you. I practiced law for a long time.
Okay.
So
Okay.
yeah, say always read the fine print, right? I think so often we're in a rush to utilize the new technology that we click accept immediately, right? Like
Right.
accept, yes, yes. To those long, long lines of fine print that we get from this tech. But I'd say read it, pay attention, make sure you know exactly what you're engaging in. And if your questions aren't answered, then it may be something you want to skip.
Yeah, yeah, because especially with the tampons and regulating menstruation and and having all that information out there. I mean, we're not going to get into a political discussion, but this goes into all kinds of issues that we're seeing with, access to services, other services that you need, whether it's abortion or maternal care or anything, and people wanting to know. I mean, we've had all this craziness going on about, regulating and having, women having young girls having to tell their schools, about their menstruation and their cycles, et cetera. And so this is like where my brain went right away is that, where is the line here? Because how is that information going to get used? Some young woman might be thinking, oh, this is really cool technology. It's going to help me, figure out what's going on with me. But they're not realizing that that information can then be used in all kinds of other ways that is not HIPAA regulated.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, 1,000%, 1,000%. And I think what you find too is most times, at least when it comes to particular technology, if you read the fine print, you'll probably get at least some clue,
Right.
as to who's going to have access to that data. We also, I mean, we're seeing things that aren't as invasive, right? I mean, we're seeing, is it Prevail has smart wear like a sports bra that helps you regulate your breathing rate and your body temperature. So really, there's probably the tampons, then there's socks, right? So there's
Yeah.
a long kind of range of like where your comfort level lies when you think about engaging in some of these medical screening devices.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's the ones that you insert anywhere into your body. Those are the ones that really, I was sort of like, that's when the alarm bells went off for me when I was reading this. I was like, okay, there's problems here. Of course, there are risks with putting anything on your body, whether it's an Aura ring or, a smartwatch or these socks that you're talking about. But at least that's on the outside of your body. So there's a little bit of that barrier still. I mean, it still can have a lot of detrimental effects with, all of the technology that's in there and the waves and all that kind of thing. But the tampons just like stressed me out. I was like, wow, this is other level, like what they're doing. So like what are they doing? Let me just ask, with these tampon things, how does that actually work? Can you tell us more about what you know about that?
Yeah, unsure if I know Tulipon is the one that has the tampon, and the app is going to tell you about your pH level and your vaginal pH. So it's connected to a smart device. So I suppose it, automatically sort of is able to somehow calibrate those results. I know there's a menstrual cup now that's connected to an app that'll tell you about your flow level. And eventually, I don't think it does it just yet, but it aims to tell you about early signs of diabetes and cholesterol and gynecological diseases. So the tech behind the how of how it's working and how it's doing, is probably a great question for some of those companies. But those are the propositions that are offered by them. I have to say, it was a part of me in reading this trend, and it's particularly about the tampons. When women's health is so understudied, you're like, well, this is good, right? Like this is a good way to kind of figure some things out if maybe you're not getting the right answers immediately, when you ask or something's wrong. But you're right, then there's the other side of the coin. And I think with any of these things, like they're not a diagnosis, and you still have to make sure that you're talking to medical professionals and getting the accurate answers. Because I think oftentimes we love to self-diagnose. We saw a lot of that during the pandemic,
Oh
right?
my gosh.
Everybody kind of
Yeah.
YouTube medical degrees, but it's important still that this should never take the place of your doctor.
Yeah. And, I really appreciate what you just said. I think it's a really good point that, on the flip side, so I'm being a little negative about it and like all stressed out about it. But the other side is that you can get a lot of information about women's health and which has been so understudied. And it's only been on, the same population of white women in a certain age group that, then gets extrapolated. And many times, like for cardiovascular disease or other diseases, not specifically women's health issues, it's on white men and that data gets extrapolated to women, which is incredibly crazy, right? So I think your point is very well taken that the positive of this is that if that information is used correctly, it can actually be a great database to help with really understanding women in all different, from different backgrounds and age groups and risk factors and finding out more about them. I think that that's a really good point. So thank you for pointing that out. I think it's important.
Maybe like a Pollyanna point, right? That's me being an eternal optimist, but I'm like, this could be a great thing, but
Yeah.
we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, also spoken like a true lawyer. I mean, you're looking at both sides, which I really appreciate. I think that that's really important. It's a good point to have out there. And so it'll be very interesting. Are there any of these trackers that you've tried that you really were interested in, or not really?
No, not yet. I think too, like just transparently, this is one of those things I tend to get a little bit like anxious. So even with my smartwatch, like I sometimes like, let me check my heart rate or, so I'm like, I know myself. I think I do better at the doctor, but definitely, I mean, I've been intrigued by a couple of these for sure. I love the night guard is one thing that, intrigues me too. Nothing else, just to learn more about myself when I'm sleeping.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
My sleep quality, that always interests me. Why do I wake up tired some days? What's going on when I lie down? But yeah, definitely intrigued by it.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's interesting. I haven't actually used any of these trackers. I've decided I'm not going to, but, I also am hesitant also because I do see that a lot of people I talk to are so stressed out about knowing everything about their bodies all the time that it almost becomes an obsessive sort of practice of checking the Apple Watch or checking the smartwatch or the Oura Ring or whatever it is, like multiple times an hour, to see, well, what's my blood pressure? What's my this? And it's almost like, it's kind of antithetical to what my work is about, which is tuning back in to your own self and learning to trust your own intuition and tuning into what your body is telling you. Not that you can't, use these in a good way, in a balanced way. But I think it's hard for a lot of people to have a balanced approach to using these technology, these smart watches and smart technology, whatever you want to go, devices. I think it can become hard for a lot of people.
Yeah, I agree. I think, you have to know yourself, right? And I think as we talk, read the fine print, ask the questions. I think that's a great starting point for engaging any of these devices.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, wow, so that is all of them. I mean, there's a couple more that we don't have time to go into, but we have covered a lot of really interesting trends, and I am so excited to see what happens and to sort of track them during the year. Maybe we'll try and get together later in the year to talk about how they seem to be progressing.
Yeah, this is really just the beginning too of our coverage. I mean, the idea is like, let's pay attention. Let's see what's going on. Let's keep talking about them throughout the year as they pop up, as we get more user, kind of reviews and experiences engaging with them. So stay tuned for sure.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Great. Well, Faye, thank you so much for doing this with me. I really appreciate your time. And it's just been so much fun talking to you about all of these trends and just engaging in some, intelligent discussion around it and me pushing back. Thank you for, engaging in that. I really appreciate it.
Oh, of course. Absolutely. And thanks for sharing your platform with us. It's been a real pleasure.
Absolutely. Anytime. I hope to do it again. Thanks again for listening to The Healing Catalyst. If you love what you heard, please hit follow and pass it along to a friend. And if you're feeling really inspired, please rate and review so that others can find this podcast more easily. To learn more, head to avantikumarsingh.com. And to connect with me directly, find me on Instagram at Avanti Kumar Singh. I'll be back next week and hope that you will be too. Until then, remember, with the right catalyst, you have the power to activate your own healing, because healing starts within.